The heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B swung shut, sealing the stifling tension inside. At the plaintiff's table sat Evelyn, perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask of calm. Across the aisle, her soon-to-be ex-husband David whispered confidently to his high-powered attorney, while a few rows back his mistress Chloe wore a smirk so sharp it could cut glass. She thought she had won. She thought she had flawlessly orchestrated a theft of the Manhattan penthouse, and the massive tech fortune. What Chloe and David didn't know was that Evelyn hadn't come to court today to fight for half of his wealth. She had come to reveal who truly owned it. The dissolution of a 15-year marriage rarely begins with a dramatic explosion. It usually starts with a whisper. For Evelyn Kensington, the whisper came in the form of a misplaced platinum American Express receipt. David Kensington was the golden boy of Silicon Alley. His cybersecurity firm Aegis Innovations had recently gone public, rocketing his net worth into the low billions. He was charismatic, ruthless in the boardroom, and until recently seemingly devoted to the woman who had bankrolled his first servers in their cramped Brooklyn apartment. Evelyn was the quiet architect of his early success. While David pitched venture capitalists, Evelyn, a brilliant but reclusive software engineer, wrote the foundational code that made Aegis's encryption unbreakable. But as the company grew, David pushed her away from the operations, convincing her she deserved a life of luxury and leisure. She stepped back, trusting the man she loved. Then came Chloe Hastings. Chloe was 28, relentlessly ambitious, and recently hired as Aegis's vice president of public relations. She had a penchant for designer clothes she couldn't quite afford on her salary, and a calculated charm that she weaponized in the corporate hierarchy. Evelyn first met Chloe at a corporate gala at the Pierre Hotel. Chloe had smiled, shaken Evelyn's hand, and complimented her vintage Chanel gown, all while making lingering, predatory eye contact with David over Evelyn's shoulder. The realization of the affair didn't hit Evelyn all at once. It was a slow trickle of agonizing evidence. The sudden influx of late-night emergency board meetings, the scent of La Beau Santal 33 on David's cholera fragrance Evelyn despised. And finally, the receipt for a $45,000 diamond tennis bracelet purchased from a boutique in Geneva during a solo business trip. Evelyn hadn't perceived the bracelet. When Evelyn finally confronted David in the study of their Upper East Side townhouse, she didn't scream. She presented the evidence calmly, laying the receipt and a dossier of private investigator photos on his mahogany desk. David didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "I suppose it was bound to come out," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Chloe and I have a connection, Evelyn. She understands the pressure I'm under. She understands the business. I built the foundation of that business," Evelyn replied, her voice dangerously quiet. David scoffed, a cruel sound that echoed in the vast room. "You wrote a few lines of outdated code a decade ago. I built the empire. And let's be clear about how this is going to go, Evelyn. You'll get the house in the Hamptons and a generous monthly allowance. But if you try to drag this through the mud, or if you think you're getting half of Aegis, my lawyers will bury you. I had the corporate structure legally reorganized 3 years ago. You're entitled to nothing but what I choose to give you." He thought her silence was submission. He thought the single tear that slipped down her cheek was a sign of defeat. He packed a bag that night and moved into a $20 million penthouse in Tribeca with Chloe. Evelyn didn't cry again. Instead, she picked up her encrypted laptop, poured herself a glass of Macallan 25, and made a phone call to a man named Thomas Gallagher. Thomas wasn't a flashy celebrity divorce lawyer. He was a former federal prosecutor turned private litigator, known in quiet, powerful circles for dissecting complex offshore financial webs. "Thomas," Evelyn said, staring out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. "It's time." He took the bait. The New York County Supreme Court is an imposing structure of granite and marble, designed to make the people inside feel small. Room 420 Civ was presided over by the Honorable Margaret Davies, a no-nonsense judge with a reputation for despising courtroom theatrics. On the first day of the preliminary hearings, the stark contrast between the two legal teams set the tone. David walked in flanked by 3 junior associates and his lead counsel, Harrison Cole. Cole was a senior partner at a white shoe firm, a man whose suits cost more than most cars and whose primary legal strategy was aggressive financial intimidation. David looked like a man arriving at a coronation rather than a divorce proceeding, wearing a bespoke navy suit and an expression of supreme confidence. A few minutes later, Chloe slipped into the gallery. Technically, as a non-party to the divorce, she had no business being there, but she wanted to watch. She sat in the second row directly behind David, crossing her legs. She was dressed impeccably in a fitted white Dior suit, a subtle but unmistakable declaration of her intent to be the next Mrs. Kensington. Around her left wrist gleamed the $45,000 diamond tennis bracelet. Evelyn arrived perfectly on time, accompanied only by Thomas Gallagher. She wore a simple, tailored charcoal blazer and a high-necked silk blouse. Her demeanor was utterly placid. As she took her seat, she didn't look at David. She didn't look at Chloe. She simply opened a plain leather notebook and uncapped a fountain pen. "All right, let's get down to brass tacks," Judge Davies announced, peering over her reading glasses at the gathered attorneys. Mr. Cole, your client has filed a motion to enforce the post-nuptial agreement signed in 2021, which effectively limits the marital estate division to personal properties and a fixed sum of $5 million. "That is correct, Your Honor," Harrison Cole boomed, standing up and adjusting his silk tie. "The postnup is ironclad. Miss Kensington was fully represented by independent counsel at the time of signing. My client has built Aegis Innovations into a global powerhouse through his own sole proprietary efforts. The corporate restructuring clearly delineates Aegis as non-marital property, sheltered in a series of irrevocable trusts based in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Ms. Kensington is attempting a shakedown, plain and simple." "No, tough. Oh, babe." In the gallery, Chloe's lips curled into a victorious smirk. She leaned forward, whispering something into the ear of one of David's junior associates, who chuckled softly. Judge Davies turned her stern gaze to Evelyn's table. "Mr. Gallagher, $5 million seems rather disproportionate to a net worth recently estimated by Forbes at $1.2 billion. Does your client contest the validity of the post-nuptial agreement?" Thomas Gallagher stood up slowly. He was a slightly rumpled man in his late 50s, lacking the polished sheen of his opponent. "Your Honor," Gallagher said, his voice calm and methodical, "we do not contest that my client signed a document in 2021. However, we contend that the agreement was signed under fraudulent pretenses regarding the actual ownership and capitalization of Aegis Innovations. Furthermore, we intend to prove that Mr. Kensington has engaged in a systematic multi-year campaign of asset dissipation to fund an illicit lifestyle." David let out a sharp, audible laugh. Cole patted his client's arm and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, this is a desperate fishing expedition. They have no proof of fraud because there is none. My client's corporate filings are pristine." "Pristine is a strong word, Mr. Cole," Judge Davies noted dryly. "I will allow discovery into the financial structure of Aegis Innovations and the offshore trust. But, Mr. Penniper Gallagher, you better find something substantial, or I will not hesitate to enforce the postnup and sanction your client for wasting this court's time." "Understood, Your Honor," Gallagher replied mildly. As court adjourned for the day, David turned around and shared a triumphant look with Chloe. He walked past Evelyn's table, pausing just long enough to lean in. $5 million is more than you deserve, Evelyn," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive espresso. "You should have taken the quiet exit. Now Cole is going to drag you through hell, and you'll end up with nothing." Evelyn didn't flinch, She finally looked up, her blue eyes meeting his with chilling emptiness. "Have a good afternoon, David," she said evenly, as David and Chloe strutted out of the courtroom, arm in arm, for the paparazzi waiting on the courthouse steps. Gallagher leaned over to Evelyn. "They're incredibly confident." "Let them be," Evelyn murmured, closing her leather notebook. "Pride always comes before the fall, and David has a very, very long way to drop." The discovery phase dragged on for 3 grueling months. Harrison Cole played every dirty trick in the corporate litigation playbook. He stonewalled document requests, dumped thousands of pages of irrelevant, heavily redacted corporate minutiae on Gallagher's desk, and filed endless protective orders claiming that Aegis Innovations' financial architecture was a trade secret. "Now, Ekfenbolger, see. Through it all, Evelyn sat silently in the deposition room, day after day, while David spun his web of lies. Under oath, David testified that the Cayman Islands shell companies, appropriately named Horizon Holdings and Apex Ventures, were entirely legitimate offshore tax vehicles managed by independent third-party trustees. He claimed he had zero access to the principal capital. He painted himself as a hard-working CEO who, on paper, only took a modest salary of $250,000 a year. Claiming his immense wealth was completely tied up in illiquid, untouchable trust assets that Evelyn had signed away all rights to. When asked about the exorbitant spending, the Tribeca penthouse, the private jet charters to St. Regin, Bart's, the fleet of luxury cars, David smoothly replied that these were corporate assets leased by Aegis for executive retention and client entertainment. And then there was Chloe. Emboldened by David's apparent legal invincibility, she became a fixture at the depositions and the subsequent pre-trial hearings. She treated the courthouse like her personal runway. One day she showed up carrying a rare Himalayan Birkin bag. The next she flaunted a custom-made diamond pendant. She would sit in the gallery making a show of looking bored, checking her manicured nails, or aggressively chewing mints whenever Gallagher spoke. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Cole and David were trying to break Evelyn's spirit. They wanted her to feel small, outgunned, and entirely powerless. They wanted her to scream, to cry, to throw a tantrum that Cole could use to paint her as an unstable, greedy, and bitter ex-wife. But Evelyn was a fortress. She absorbed the insults, the blatant perjury, and the financial gaslighting without a single change in her expression. The turning point in the pretrial phase occurred during a freezing morning in late November. The court had reconvened to address Gallagher's motion to compel bank records from a specific bank in Zurich Credit Suisse. Cole was practically vibrating with indignation. "Your Honor, this is harassment. We have already provided 3 years of domestic banking history. Now Mr. Gallagher wants to pierce the veil of a Swiss financial institution based on a wild, unsubstantiated theory that my client is hiding cash. Mr. Navikias, Mr. Navikomad, Kensington has testified under penalty of perjury that he holds no personal accounts in Switzerland." Judge Davies looked at Gallagher, her patience visibly wearing thin. "Mr. Gallagher, you are asking for international subpoenas. That is an extreme measure. What exactly is your foundation for this request?" "So far, you've shown me a lot of smoke, but no fire." Gallagher walked over to his briefcase. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a single sheet of paper. He didn't hand it to the judge right away. He walked over to David's table and handed a copy to Harrison Cole. "Your Honor," Gallagher said, turning back to the bench, "we are not looking for Mr. Kensington's personal accounts. We are looking for the disbursement records of a specific Delaware LLC named Echo Technologies." "Now, Tudopti." At the mention of the name, David's posture stiffened infinitesimally. It was a micro expression, a slight tightening of the jaw, but Evelyn caught it. In the gallery, Chloe, oblivious to the nuance, let out a loud theatrical sigh and checked her phone. Cole scanned the document, his brow furrowing. Echo Technologies. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Echo Technologies is a dormant subsidiary of Aegis. It holds patents, nothing more. It hasn't generated revenue in 6 years. If it's dormant, Mr. Bun Cole, Gallagher countered, his voice rising just enough to command the room. Then you shouldn't mind explaining why exactly $2.4 million was wired from a Credit Suisse account belonging to Echo Technologies to a luxury real estate broker in Manhattan on August 14th of last year. Silence fell over the courtroom. The scratch of the court reporter's stenotype machine suddenly sounded very loud. Judge Davies leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Cole, is your client using a dormant patent holding company to purchase real estate? Cole looked at David. For the first time in the entire proceeding, David looked slightly panicked. He leaned in and whispered furiously to his lawyer. Your Honor, Cole stammered, attempting to recover his bluster. I would need to consult with the corporate accounting department. It is entirely possible this was a legitimate corporate investment property. The property in question, Gallagher interrupted, handing the document up to the bailiff to give to the judge, is a penthouse apartment in Tribeca, the exact penthouse where Mr. Kensington and his companion, Miss Hastings, currently reside. An asset Mr. Kensington previously testified under oath was leased by the parent company for client entertainment. In the gallery, Chloe's head snapped up from her phone. She looked at David, confusion marring her perfectly contoured face. Furthermore, Gallagher continued relentlessly, we have evidence that the funds used to capitalize Echo Technologies did not come from Aegis Innovations' corporate revenue. They came from a highly encrypted digital wallet, a wallet that has been quietly siphoning fractions of a cent from every single transaction processed by Aegis's proprietary encryption software since the day the company went public. The color completely drained from David's face. He stared at Evelyn, sheer terror finally replacing his arrogance. Evelyn, for her part, simply kicked her fountain pen closed. A click echoed in the silent room. She met David's panicked gaze and, very slowly, offered him a small, chilling smile. The web wasn't just unraveling, it was about to catch fire, and what David hadn't realized was that Evelyn wasn't just his ex-wife. She was the one who wrote the code. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in courtroom 2012 was the rhythmic, hollow ticking of the antique mahogany clock on the wall. Harrison Cole, a man who charged $2,000 an hour to never be caught off guard, stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar. Next to him, David Kensington looked as though all the oxygen had just been violently sucked from his lungs. In the gallery, the smirk that had lived on Chloe Hastings' face for 3 months vanished, replaced by a deep, panicked frown. She looked down at the $45,000 diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, her mind seemingly trying to calculate its worth versus the sudden, terrifying mention of an encrypted digital wallet. Mr. Cole? Judge Davies prompted, her voice slicing through the heavy silence. I'm waiting for an explanation regarding Echo Technologies and this $2.4 million wire transfer. Cole swallowed hard, finally recovering a fraction of his composure. Your Honor, I strongly object. This is an ambush. Plaintiff's counsel is introducing complex financial allegations out of thin air, attempting to conflate corporate bookkeeping errors with marital asset hiding. We have not been provided any documentation regarding a digital wallet, nor have we seen any proof that my client authorized such a transfer. Thomas Gallagher didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He possessed the quiet, devastating confidence of a man holding a royal flush. He reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, spiral-bound report, handing copies to the bailiff and to a visibly sweating Cole. Your Honor, there is no ambush, only the culmination of a highly specialized forensic investigation, Gallagher said smoothly. 3 weeks ago, we retained the services of FTI Consulting, one of the premier forensic accounting firms in the world, alongside blockchain analysts from Chainalysis. We provided them with a heavily encrypted flash drive. David's head snapped toward Evelyn. His eyes were wide, frantic. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly on the table in front of her. "And what was on this flash drive, Mr. Gallagher?" Judge Davies asked, flipping open the thick report, the original uncompiled source code for Aegis Prime, the foundational encryption software that Mr. Kensington's entire public company is built upon, Gallagher explained. "As the court is aware, my client Evelyn Kensington was the sole author of that code. What Mr. Kensington seemingly forgot when he locked his wife out of the corporate servers 3 years ago was that as the architect of the software, she retained the original offline backups." Gallagher paced slowly toward the center of the room. "When my client discovered the discrepancies in her marriage, she didn't just look at credit card receipts. She looked at the digital architecture she had built. Evelyn noticed an anomaly in the most recent public updates of the Aegis software. A highly sophisticated microscopic subroutine had been appended to her original code. It was a classic salami slicing attack, updated for the modern blockchain era. Cole was on his feet again. "Objection. This is absurd. We are in a family court, Your Honor, not a cybercrimes tribunal. Mr. Gallagher is throwing around technical jargon to smear my client's reputation." "Overruled," Judge Davies snapped, her eyes riveted to the FTI consulting report. "I'm extremely interested in this technical jargon. Continue, Mr. Gallagher." "It's quite simple, Your Honor," Gallagher continued, projecting his voice so it echoed off the marble walls. "Every time an Aegis client, which includes multinational banks and healthcare conglomerates, processes a secure transaction using this software, the hidden subroutine siphons off a fraction of a cent. It is an amount so microscopically small that no corporate audit would ever flag it as a discrepancy. But when you are processing 3 billion transactions a day, those fractions of a cent add up to roughly $50,000 every 24 hours. A collective gasp echoed from the few clerks and legal aides in the room. Chloe had stopped looking at her bracelet. She was staring at David in absolute, unadulterated horror. "This ghost revenue," Gallagher pressed on, "was automatically converted into a decentralized cryptocurrency, specifically Monero, known for its extreme privacy features. The funds were then funneled through a labyrinth of shell wallets before being deposited into a Binance exchange account registered to Echo Technologies. From there, it was converted back into fiat currency and wired to Credit Suisse." "Lies," David hissed, his voice trembling as he gripped the edge of the defense table. "She's lying. She fabricated this entire thing because she's bitter." Judge Davies banged her gavel sharply. "Mr. Kensington, you will speak only through your attorney, or I will hold you in contempt. Mr. Gallagher, how exactly did your client and these firms tie an anonymous Monero wallet to Mr. Kensington?" Gallagher smiled for the first time that day. It was a cold, predatory smile. "Because, Your Honor, David Kensington is a brilliant salesman, but he is a remarkably sloppy coder. To execute the automated transfer to the Binance exchange, the subroutine required an administrative trigger. Mr. Kensington didn't write a new cryptographic key for that trigger. He used an old one. Specifically, he used the exact alphanumeric string that he and his wife used as the password for their first joint checking account 15 years ago. Chainalysis traced the withdrawal protocol directly to the IP address of Mr. Pawn, Kensington's private office in Manhattan. Cole sat down heavily. The color had entirely left his face. He looked at his client, no longer seeing a golden boy CEO, but a walking liability. Cole was a ruthless lawyer, but he wasn't a fool. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Not a divorce settlement dispute, but a massive multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. Evelyn finally turned her head to look directly at her husband. For years he had told her she was irrelevant, that her contributions were a thing of the past, that she was too soft and small for the brutal world of big business. "You should have changed her passwords, David," Evelyn said quietly, her voice carrying easily across the silent room. Judge Davies took off her reading glasses and rubbed her temples. "Mr. Cole, I am going to call a recess until tomorrow morning. I strongly suggest you use this time to confer with your client. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Past Gallagher's motion to freeze all accounts associated with Echo Technologies, Horizon Holdings, and Apex Ventures pending a full forensic audit. As the judge swept out of the room, the courtroom erupted. David's junior associates were frantically packing their briefcases, desperately trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. Harrison Cole leaned in close to David, his voice a furious, barely contained whisper. You told me the offshore structure was clean. You told me there was no trail. It is clean, David stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. She hacked it. She must have planted this to frame me. Cole shook his head in disgust. You don't understand, do you? The judge doesn't care about the divorce anymore. We are in entirely different territory now. Behind them, Chloe stood up. Her hands were shaking. She stepped into the aisle, blocking David's path as he tried to rush out of the courtroom. David, Chloe said, her voice high-pitched and strained. What is he talking about? Echo Technologies? That's the LLC that holds the lease on the Tribeca place. You told me the company paid for it. David looked at his mistress, the mask of the confident billionaire completely shattered. Not now, Chloe. Just go back to the apartment. I have to deal with my lawyers. Is it stolen money, David? She demanded, her voice echoing in the emptying room. Because if you bought me this jewelry with stolen corporate funds... Shut up, Chloe, David snapped, his face contorting with rage. Just do what I tell you and go home. Chloe recoiled as if she had been slapped. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. She hadn't snagged a titan of industry. She had attached herself to an embezzler whose entire empire was built on a foundation of digital sand. Without another word, she turned and practically ran out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind her. The next morning, the atmosphere in the courthouse hallway was entirely different. The paparazzi, tipped off by an anonymous source, likely someone from FTI Consulting or a junior clerk, was swarming the steps. Rumors of a massive financial scandal involving Aegis Innovations had leaked to the financial press. By 8:30 a.m., Aegis's stock had plummeted 18% in pre-market trading. When Evelyn arrived, she was flanked by two burly private security guards Gallagher had hired for the week. She wore a striking navy blue trench coat, looking every bit the calm eye of the raging hurricane she had unleashed. As they walked down the long marble corridor toward courtroom 412, a figure stepped out from an empty alcove blocking their path. It was David. He looked atrocious. He was wearing the same bespoke suit from the day before, but it was wrinkled. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and dark, heavy bags hung under his bloodshot eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept a single second. Harrison Cole was nowhere to be seen. Evelyn, David rasped, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Please, I need 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes, alone. Gallagher stepped forward smoothly, inserting himself between his client and her husband. Mr. Kensington, any communication you wish to have with my client must go through your counsel. Where is Mr. Cole? David let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Cole quit. He dropped me as a client at midnight. Said his firm couldn't represent me due to unforeseen conflicts of interest. He's terrified of the fallout. David looked past Gallagher, fixing his desperate eyes on Evelyn. Evie, please, you have to call off the dogs. We can settle this. Right now. I'll give you the 5 million. Hell, I'll give you 15 million. I'll transfer the Hamptons house today. Just tell the judge the forensic report was a mistake. Tell them it was a diagnostic test gone wrong. Evelyn didn't move. She looked at the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed her own ambitions for, and felt absolutely nothing. The well of her grief had dried up months ago, leaving behind only cold, hard resolve. I can't do that, David, she said evenly. You can, he hissed, being a step closer, his desperation morphing into something ugly and frantic. You wrote the code, Evelyn. You can explain it away to the court. If you let Gallagher push this forward, they aren't just going to take the money. Aegis is a publicly traded company. Do you understand what that means? The board will crucify me. I'll lose everything. Nice. Ed, you mean you'll lose the money? Evelyn corrected him quietly. You'll lose the Tribeca penthouse. You'll lose the private jets. I imagine you'll probably lose Chloe too, considering she doesn't strike me as the type to stand by a man whose assets are frozen. David flinched, the truth of her words hitting him like a physical blow. Evie, you're my wife. We built this together. You can't want to see me destroyed. I know I made mistakes. I was stressed. Chloe was just a distraction. A stupid, meaningless distraction. I still love you. The blatant manipulation, the ease with which he threw the woman he had abandoned her for under the bus, was breathtaking. Evelyn felt a brief, sharp sting of pity. Not for David, but for the younger version of her who had believed this man possessed a soul. You don't love me, David, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a glacial chill. You love what I provided for you. You loved the foundation I built so you could stand tall. And when you felt tall enough, you kicked me away. You thought I was stupid. You thought because I didn't care about the gala dinners or the designer clothes that I didn't understand the power I held. I never thought you were stupid, he pleaded, reaching out to touch her arm. Evelyn stepped back, her eyes flashing with sudden terrifying authority. Don't touch me. You stole from your own company. You stole from your shareholders. You stole from the software I spent years agonizing over. You corrupted my life's work to buy 28-year-old PR assistant diamond bracelets. David's shoulders slumped. The fight was leaving him, replaced by a suffocating terror. If you do this, Evelyn, if you submit that report into the official court record, I'll go to prison. It's wire fraud. It's securities fraud. Thomas Gallagher checked his watch, adjusting his glasses. Actually, Mr. Kensington, my client doesn't need to submit the report into the civil record to trigger those consequences. David's head whipped around to look at the lawyer. What are you talking about? As an officer of the court, Gallagher said, adopting a tone of faux apology. When I uncover irrefutable evidence of the massive, ongoing fraud within a publicly traded company, I have certain legal and ethical obligations. I can't just use that information for leverage in a civil divorce proceeding. That would be extortion. David stared at him, his face slack. What did you do? Yesterday afternoon, while you and Mr. Cole were presumably having a very difficult conversation, my office filed a formal Form TCR ATIPs, complaints and referrals, submission with the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Gallagher explained pleasantly. We also forwarded a copy of the FTI Consulting blockchain analysis to the White-Collar Crime Division of the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan. David's legs seemed to give out. He stumbled backward, hitting the marble wall of the corridor and sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. He was hyperventilating, the reality of federal indictments crashing down upon his carefully constructed, billionaire lifestyle. You didn't, David gasped, pulling at his hair. You couldn't have. They'll freeze Aegis. The board will remove me by the end of the day. They already convened an emergency meeting at 7 a.m., Gallagher noted, checking his phone. I imagine your phone has been ringing. David pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was lit up with dozens of missed calls from his chief operating officer, from the chairman of his board, and from numbers he didn't recognize, likely federal investigators. Evelyn looked down at him. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a profound sense of closure. She had spent 15 years building him up, and in exactly 3 months she had dismantled him completely. Not out of malice, but out of a precise, unyielding demand for the truth. You wanted to enforce the post-nuptial agreement, David, Evelyn said softly. The one that entitled me to $5 million and a house in the Hamptons. David looked up, his eyes swimming with tears of pure self-pity. I'm going to honor it, Evelyn told him. I'm going to take the 5 million, and I'm going to take the house. You can keep your shares in Aegis. You can keep Echo Technologies. You can keep everything else. She turned to walk away, her heels clicking decisively against the marble floor. She paused and looked back over her shoulder one last time. You're going to need every penny you have left to pay your criminal defense attorneys. Goodbye, David. Evelyn Kensington and Thomas Gallagher pushed through the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4112, leaving the ruined architect of $1 billion lie sitting alone on the floor of the courthouse hallway, waiting for the federal agents to arrive. The morning after the courthouse confrontation, the air in Manhattan felt distinctly sharper, carrying the electric charge of an impending storm. But for David Kensington, the storm didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with the terrifying, rhythmic thud of a battering ram against the reinforced steel door of his Tribeca penthouse. It was 6 a.m. Chloe Hastings bolted upright in the custom king-sized bed, clutching the silk sheets to her chest. Beside her, David was already awake, having spent the entire night pacing the floor, alternating between screaming at his phone and drinking straight from a bottle of Macallan. FBI, open the door. We have a federal warrant. The voice echoing from the foyer was devoid of emotion, a bureaucratic battering ram preceding the physical one. David froze, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure. He didn't move toward the door. He simply stood there, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, watching his empire burn down in his mind. Before Chloe could even reach for her silk robe, the front door was breached. The sheer noise of it-wood splintering, metal tearing shattered the quiet luxury of the $20 million apartment. Suddenly, the bedroom was flooded with agents wearing dark windbreakers with FBI and FinCEN emblazoned on the back in bold yellow lettering. Leading the raid was Special Agent Jonathan Miller of the Southern District of New York's White-Collar Crime Division. He was a man who had dismantled Wall Street insider trading rings and international money laundering syndicates. To him, David Kensington was just another arrogant tech bro who thought he could outsmart the blockchain. David Kensington, Agent Miller asked, stepping into the bedroom. He didn't wait for an answer. You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical scream as two agents forcefully but efficiently spun David around and clamped cold steel handcuffs onto his wrists. David offered no resistance. His eyes were wide and vacant, locked in a state of catatonic shock. What is happening? Chloe shrieked, finally throwing on her robe and stumbling out of bed. You can't just barge in here. Do you know who he is? Agent Miller gave her a withering look. We know exactly who he is, Nam. And right now he's a flight risk with access to decentralized cryptocurrency. Miller turned to his team. Bag all the electronics. Phones, laptops, tablets, smartwatches. I want the router, the servers in the home office, and find the cold storage crypto wallets. Tear the walls open if you have to. As the agents began systematically dismantling the penthouse, pulling books off shelves, slicing open the backs of framed modern art, and sweeping high-end electronics into static-proof evidence bags, Chloe scrambled toward the walk-in closet. She needed her things. She needed her passport. She needed to get to the house in the Hamptons. Hold it right there, Miss Hastings, Agent Miller barked, stepping into her path. Chloe froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm not involved in his business. I'm just his. I'm his girlfriend. I want to leave. You aren't going anywhere just yet, Miller replied, pulling a meticulously itemized list from his jacket pocket. According to the asset freeze authorized by a federal judge at 3 o'clock this morning, all properties, accounts, and physical assets purchased with funds linked to Echo Technologies are subject to immediate seizure. That includes this apartment. Chloe's breath hitched. What? Miller's eyes dropped to Chloe's left wrist. That also includes the 62-carat diamond tennis bracelet you're wearing, purchased in Geneva on October 12th. I'm going to need you to take that off, Mom. It's evidence. No, Chloe gasped, instinctively covering the bracelet with her other hand. He gave this to me. It was a gift. It was purchased with stolen corporate funds, Miller corrected her coldly. Take it off, or I will have an agent remove it for you. Tears of profound humiliation spilled down Chloe's cheeks. With trembling fingers, she undid the clasp, dropping the glittering jewelry into the plastic evidence bag Miller held open. She was standing in a multi-million-dollar apartment wearing designer silk, realizing with brutal clarity that she was absolutely destitute. The billionaire lifestyle she had schemed and clawed to achieve had evaporated overnight, while David was being walked out of his own building, captured perfectly by the swarm of paparazzi, tipped off to the raid. A parallel execution was taking place in the glass-walled boardroom of Aegis Innovations' Manhattan headquarters. Arthur Vanderbeek, the formidable chairman of the board, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He was a veteran of the tech industry, a man who survived the dot-com bubble and the 2008 crash. He did not tolerate liabilities. Surrounding him were the other board members, a phalanx of corporate crisis lawyers, and the company's chief financial officer, who looked physically ill. The stock is in freefall, Vanderbeek announced, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. We're down 42% since the opening bell. The SEC has formally halted trading, and the Department of Justice has notified us that the company itself is under investigation for failure to maintain adequate internal financial controls. The CFO swallowed hard. Arthur, the FTI consulting report. We verified the findings internally this morning. The subroutine is there. It's embedded deep in the foundational architecture. Kensington programmed an automated siphon that's been bleeding fractional cents from client transactions for 3 years. He compromised the core product, Vanderbeek said, striking the table with his fist. He compromised the security of multinational banks, the Department of Defense, and healthcare grids, all to fund his private offshore accounts. A corporate attorney leaned forward. We have drafted the press release. We are terminating David Kensington as CEO immediately for cause, stripping him of his board seat and actively cooperating with federal authorities. We are also filing a civil suit against him for breach of fiduciary duty to claw back whatever assets the feds don't seize. Do it, Vanderbeek snapped, and get a team of engineers down to the server room. I want that subroutine excised by noon, or we won't have a company left to save. What Vanderbeek and the panicked board didn't realize, however, was that excising the malicious code wasn't going to save Aegis Innovations. The damage was terminal. The software's reputation was destroyed, and in the cybersecurity sector, trust is the only currency that matters. Back in the quiet, solemn chambers of the New York County Supreme Court, Judge Margaret Davies signed the final divorce decree. It was the fastest, most frictionless proceeding she had presided over in her 20-year career. Thomas Gallagher stood beside Evelyn Kensington reviewing the signed documents. There were no arguments. There was no Harrison Cole to bluster and object. David's new court-appointed public defender, because his assets were frozen entirely, had merely nodded and advised his client to sign whatever Evelyn put in front of him to avoid further antagonizing the very witness the federal government was relying on. In accordance with the 2021 post-nuptial agreement, Evelyn walked away with $5 million in clean, verified cash and the deed to the sprawling oceanfront estate in East Hampton. It was a fraction of a percent of what the marital estate had once been worth on paper. As they walked down the courthouse steps, shielded from the press by Gallagher's security team, the lawyer looked at Evelyn. "Are you all right, Evelyn?" Gallagher asked quietly. "I know this isn't exactly how anyone imagines their marriage ending. It's a hollow victory." Evelyn stopped on the bottom step and took a deep breath of the crisp city air. She looked at the chaotic throng of reporters screaming David's name, asking about his impending arraignment. She felt lighter than she had in years. The heavy, suffocating blanket of David's ego and deceit had finally been lifted. It's not hollow, Thomas, Evelyn said, a genuine, serene smile touching her lips. It's exactly what I wanted. I wanted the truth on the record, and I wanted to be completely legally separated from Aegis Innovations. Gallagher furrowed his brow, sensing a subtext he didn't quite grasp. You are. The corporate restructuring and this decree ensure you have absolutely no liability for David's crimes or the collapse of the company. Good, Evelyn said, adjusting her trench coat. Because Aegis is a sinking ship, but the ocean is still out there. And I am a very good swimmer. 6 months later, the East Hampton estate was a masterpiece of classic coastal architecture. Cedar shingles weathered to a perfect silver gray, wraparound porches, and a sprawling green lawn that sloped gently down to the private beach. The sound of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the shoreline provided a constant, soothing soundtrack. Evelyn sat at a massive reclaimed oak dining table on the back patio. She was dressed comfortably in a cashmere sweater and linen trousers, a stark contrast to the stiff armored suits she had worn during the trial. Spread out before her wasn't legal paperwork, but complex, densely packed architectural schematics for server farms and pages of complex mathematical algorithms. The heavy glass sliding door opened, and Thomas Gallagher walked out carrying a leather briefcase and 2 cups of coffee from a local roaster. He had become less of a lawyer and more of a trusted confidant in the ensuing months. Beautiful morning, Gallagher said, setting a coffee down in front of her. The traffic on the Long Island Expressway was actually bearable. Thank you for making the drive, Thomas, Evelyn smiled, taking a sip. Gallagher took a seat across from her, his eyes scanning the incredibly complex algorithms spread across the table. I have the final updates from the Southern District. David's legal team tried to negotiate a plea deal yesterday. The U.S., the one attorney's office, rejected it outright. Evelyn didn't look up from her papers. Why? Because of the sheer scale of the victims, Gallagher explained. It wasn't just corporate money he stole. He compromised the security infrastructure of 3 major hospitals and a regional power grid to run his crypto siphon. The judge denied bail again. He's been remanded to the Metropolitan Correctional Center downtown. His trial starts in October. He's looking at a mandatory minimum of 25 years. Evelyn simply nodded, making a precise notation on her schematic with a mechanical pencil. And Chloe, Ms. Menz. Hastings attempted to leverage an exclusive tell-all interview with a daytime talk show claiming she was a victim of David's manipulation. Gallagher chuckled darkly. Unfortunately for her, the IRS took a profound interest in the gifts David bought her. Since they were purchased with embezzled funds, she owes back taxes on the assessed value. Last I heard, she's working as a hostess at a mid-tier steakhouse in New Jersey, trying to pay off the federal government. Actions have consequences, Evelyn murmured, turning a page. Indeed they do, Gallagher said, leaning back in his chair. He looked at Evelyn carefully. You know, Evelyn, you walked away with $5 million. That's a lot of money to most people. But it's not retire at 38 and maintain a 20-acre Hamptons estate indefinitely money. I have wealth managers who can help you invest it conservatively. Keep you comfortable. Evelyn finally stopped writing. She set her pencil down and looked at Gallagher, her bright blue eyes sparkling with an intelligence that was both brilliant and slightly intimidating. I don't need a wealth manager, Thomas. And I'm not retiring. Gallagher frowned. I don't understand. When David locked me out of the Aegis servers 3 years ago, he told me my coding skills were outdated. He told me I belonged to the past, Evelyn began, her voice calm and measured. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just resting. I was observing. Evelyn reached into a manila folder and pulled out a sleek black bound document. The cover simply read Project Sentinel, Quantum-Resistant Cryptographic Architecture. She slid it across the table to her lawyer. Aegis Prime, the software David built his billion-dollar empire on, was fundamentally flawed, Evelyn explained. Not just because he corrupted it with his pathetic theft subroutine. but because it was built on traditional prime number factorization. It was brilliant 10 years ago, but with the rapid advancement of quantum computing, Aegis was destined to become obsolete, hackable, useless. Gallagher opened the document, his eyes widening as he skimmed the dense, highly technical executive summary. "Evelyn, what is this?" "This," Evelyn said, tapping the black cover, "is the future." For the past 3 years, while David was attending galas and buying penthouses with his mistress, I was sitting in this house building a new encryption algorithm, one based on lattice cryptography. It is entirely immune to quantum computer decryption. It is virtually unbreakable by any machine that currently exists or will exist in the next 50 years. Gallagher stared at her, the realization slowly dawning on him. "You built a replacement for Aegis." "I built an executioner for Aegis," Evelyn corrected him gently. David's arrest just accelerated the timeline. When the SEC halted trading and the DOJ revealed the vulnerability in Aegis's code, every single one of their major clients, the banks, the tech conglomerates, the Department of Defense, panicked. They immediately started searching for a secure alternative. "And you had one ready," Gallagher breathed, astounded by the sheer, calculating patience of the woman sitting across from him. "I had it patented, vetted by independent security researchers at MIT, and legally sheltered under a blind LLC entirely separate from the marital estate, a year before I ever saw that American Express receipt," Evelyn said, a fierce, unapologetic pride radiating from her. "I knew David was self-destructing. I just made sure I had my lifeboats built before he sank the ship." Gallagher shook his head in pure disbelief. "Evelyn, the intellectual property value of a verified quantum-resistant encryption protocol in this market, especially with Aegis collapsing, is astronomical," Evelyn finished for him. She reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single sheet of heavy, watermarked paper. It was a formal letter of intent. "Yesterday morning, I finalized a private acquisition deal with Apex Global, the largest defense contractor in the country. They are buying the absolute rights to the Sentinel protocol and installing me as the chief technology officer of their new cybersecurity division." Gallagher picked up the letter. His eyes immediately darted to the bolded financial figures at the bottom of the page. He choked on his coffee, coughing violently before managing to speak. $2.4 billion? Gallagher stammered, staring at the number as if it might spontaneously combust. "Evelyn, this is a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Half in cash, half in voting stock," Evelyn confirmed, smiling warmly. "It turns out my code wasn't so outdated after all." Scott. Mom. While David Kensington sat in a 6x8 cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, eating lukewarm oatmeal and wearing an orange jumpsuit, he stared at a small wall-mounted television tuned to CNBC. The breaking news ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen was a dagger to his heart. Breaking. Apex Global acquires quantum encryption startup Sentinel for $2.4 billion. Founders Ash ATCTEV Len Kenshin, the named new CTO. David stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. The anchor was talking about a historic shift in cybersecurity and praising the unparalleled genius of the reclusive female engineer. They showed a photo of Evelyn, not the quiet, submissive wife he had treated with such contempt, but a radiant, powerful titan of industry. In that agonizing moment, David finally understood the totality of his defeat. Evelyn hadn't just exposed his secret to the world. She had kept her own brilliant billion-dollar secret hidden until the exact moment it would destroy him the most. She hadn't fought him for a piece of his fraudulent pie, she had simply stepped over his ruins and bought the entire bakery. Back in the Hamptons, the salty ocean breeze blew across the patio, rustling the schematics on the table. "So, Thomas," Evelyn said, picking up her coffee cup and looking out at the endless horizon, You were right, $5 million isn't enough to retire on. But $2.4 billion is a rather nice starting budget for my next project. Don't you think? Gallagher just laughed, a deep, ringing sound of pure admiration. Miss Kensington, I don't think I will ever bet against you. Did you love the sweet taste of Evelyn's ultimate revenge? There is nothing more satisfying than watching an arrogant, deceitful villain realize they've been outsmarted by the very person they underestimated. If this dramatic courtroom thriller had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. We want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment? Was it the FBI raid, Chloe losing her diamond bracelet, or Evelyn's massive billion-dollar mic drop at the very end? Drop a comment below and let us know whose downfall was the most satisfying. Don't forget to share this story with anyone who loves a brilliant plot twist and a strong, genius female lead who takes back her power. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our next gripping real-life drama.